The Munmorah State Conservation Area on the central coast of New South Wales, Australia, is defined by its sheer, jagged volcanic rock shelves and deep, turbulent marine inlets. At a specific coastal feature known as Snapper Point, a deep subterranean cavity channels this kinetic force, creating a violent blowhole where the ocean pounds furiously against the Permian-Triassic sandstone. But on the morning of Sunday, April 24th, 2016, a highly improbable anomaly in the oceanic tidal patterns occurs. The churning currents do not pull outward. Instead, a tourist exploring the scenic lookouts notices something suspended in the highly aerated, foamy surface waters. It is the lifeless body of a young woman. Her discovery marks the beginning of one of the most forensically demanding investigations in recent history, an event that will ultimately redefine the limits of how long a buried truth can survive in the digital age. On Monday, April 25th, the day after the discovery at the blowhole, an official missing persons report is filed at the local police command in the southwest suburb of Campsie. A 27-year-old Australian man named Derek Barrett, accompanied by his 48-year-old wife, walks into the station. To the officers on duty, Barrett presents the compelling facade of a bewildered, distraught relative, desperately seeking answers regarding the sudden disappearance of his niece-in-law. 4 days later, on Friday, April 29th, the New South Wales Police Force releases a computer-generated composite image of the Jane Doe recovered from the ocean.
As a result, an investigation was commenced. The post-mortem revealed that the woman had suffered a number of wounds, significantly some stab wounds. Our interpretation of the situation is that she suffered a violent assault prior to her death. The description of the woman, who at this point in time have not identified, is an Asian female aged between 20 and 35, medium build, shoulder-length hair. She has no distinguishing tattoos or scars on her body. Her body was naked when it was found in the water, and all jewellery had been removed. Anyone with any information or any concerns about a woman matching that description, we would encourage to come forward.
The public response is instantaneous. Members of the Chinese community flood the police hotlines, recognizing the facial features. By mid-morning, forensic biologists utilize rapid DNA testing to formally confirm the identity. The victim is 25-year-old Mengmei Leng, an international student who is also known as Michelle by her friends and families. The public mourns the loss of a young woman who seemingly encountered the worst external dangers of an unfamiliar metropolis. Yet, the objective reality being systematically pieced together by strike force detectives is forming a vastly different, deeply unsettling picture. The threat did not emerge from the shadowy streets. To comprehend the spatial and psychological isolation that facilitates this tragedy, one must examine the specific demographic environment surrounding the victim. Mengmei Leng resides in Campsie, a prominent suburb situated within the Canterbury-Bankstown local government area. In the framework of urban geography, Campsie operates as a classic ethnoburb, a high-density, multi-ethnic suburban community where specific minority groups maintain significant commercial, cultural, and demographic concentrations. By the time of the 2016 Australian census, this corridor has experienced explosive population growth, emerging as one of the most densely populated precincts in Greater Sydney. The streets are deeply saturated with international students holding temporary visas. The proliferation of familiar culinary infrastructures, local Chinese-owned businesses, and bilingual legal and medical services creates a powerful, comforting illusion. It presents a protective, self-sustaining enclave that seemingly shields incoming migrants from the broader, unfamiliar city. For an international student, Mengmei Leng, residing in such an environment offers a complex paradox. It provides immediate cultural familiarity, yet masks a profound systemic vulnerability. Separated from their lifelong familial support networks in mainland China, these students frequently rely on extended relatives or complex cohabitation arrangements to mitigate the notoriously high tuition and living costs of the city. Mengmei Leng fits the archetype of the aspirational, upwardly mobile migrant. Native to Chengdu, the capital of Sichuan Province, China, her early life is defined by unimaginable tragedy. In 2008, the catastrophic Sichuan earthquake devastates her home province, claiming the life of her father. This immense loss forges an intensely close, interdependent psychological bond with her mother, Mei Zhang. Driven by a long-held ambition to study overseas, Leng relocates to Sydney around 2011. She demonstrates academic tenacity and deep cultural integration, ultimately graduating with a bachelor's degree in business from the prestigious University of Technology, Sydney, just a year prior to the events in Campsie. Her living arrangement is entirely practical. She resides in a multi-unit apartment block with her aunt and her aunt's husband, Derek Barrett. This setup is explicitly intended to serve as a secure domestic anchor while she navigates her higher education. However, it introduces a highly unconventional familial dynamic. Barrett is 21 years younger than his wife, and remarkably only 2 years older than Mengmei. Despite this narrow age gap, the cultural expectation of filial piety, which demands a high degree of respect and deference to elder family members, grants Barrett a position of assumed paternalistic authority. He is a former IT worker originally from the quiet coastal town of Guandalan. To the outside world and to the decentralized community networks that share safety warnings, he is simply the protective uncle by marriage. When a threat gestates within the presumed sanctuary of the home, the ethnoburb's external safety mechanisms are rendered entirely void. The stage is further set by a silent environmental catalyst. The month of April 2016 is characterized by unseasonably warm and anomalously dry conditions across the state. Persistent high-pressure systems effectively block rain-bearing cold fronts from moving up from the Southern Ocean. The greater Sydney area experiences continuous warmth, moderate humidity of approximately 74%, and a stable barometric pressure of 30.16 inches of mercury. Daily high temperatures consistently hover around 24 to 25 degrees Celsius. In the context of forensic pathology, this specific climatological reality is a critical variable that will directly influence the biological timeline of the crime and ultimately force a perpetrator into a desperate, high-risk logistical emergency. Between April 1st and April 24th, a critical shift occurs within the spatial dynamics of the residence. Mengmei's aunt, Barrett's wife, travels to the coastal city of Wollongong for ongoing work commitments. This geographic separation completely removes the primary capable guardian from the domestic environment. The apartment is now occupied solely by Barrett, a stepdaughter, and Mengmei. This prolonged absence serves as a vital operational window, allowing an organized offender to escalate his surveillance, monitor the daily ingress and egress patterns of the household, and prepare to transition dark ideations into physical reality. Thursday, April the 21st, is the last verified day of Mengmei Leng's life. Her movements across the Sydney metropolitan area are highly documented by immutable electronic ledgers and municipal infrastructure. In the early afternoon, she socializes with friends and visits the bustling Sydney Fish Market. Between 3 and 4 o'clock, she transitions to the primary retail district. Closed-circuit television footage captures her utilizing the escalators inside the Meyer department store at the Pitt Street Mall. The visual evidence clearly identifies her wearing a gray, long-sleeved top, black pants, and distinctive black and white sneakers. By mid-afternoon, additional cameras record her walking through the turnstiles at the underground St. James train station, carrying shopping bags and a takeaway beverage, preparing for the rail commute back to the southwest suburbs. At 4:30, The train arrives at the major transit hub serving the Canterbury-Bankstown corridor. The Transport for NSW system registers her Opal transit card, tapping out at the Campsie station exit barriers at exactly 4:32 p.m. 10 minutes later, security cameras positioned at the entrance of her residential complex capture her walking into the building. She will never be seen alive in public again. Throughout the evening, she maintains passive digital communication with her peer network. A final text message is dispatched at approximately midnight. After this precise timestamp, her phone and all associated social media accounts go permanently dark. When Barrett files the official missing persons report, his narrative relies entirely on the assumption that Mengmei vanished somewhere in the external urban landscape. But the New South Wales police force immediately begins to utilize a strict framework of digital epistemology to test his claims. They rely on objective electronic data to systematically dismantle the fabricated alibi. The transit mapping fundamentally contradicts Barrett's feigned ignorance. The Opal card ledger places the student firmly back inside the domestic sphere, directly in his immediate vicinity. A far more damning piece of evidence soon emerges from telecommunications tracking. Detectives pull the cellular tower records for Barrett's mobile phone. The data reveals a critical electronic ping at an exchange in Doyleson on the morning of Sunday, April 24th. Doyleson is situated less than 10 kilometers from the Snapper Point blowhole. This irrefutable digital footprint places Barrett at the exact geographic coordinates of the disposal site. During the precise temporal window, the body was cast into the ocean. Furthermore, investigators note the deeply unsettling spatial logic of the location. Barrett is originally from Guandolen, a coastal town just 9 kilometers from the treacherous blowhole. He possesses intimate, lifelong local knowledge of the coast's inherent lethality. Criminological research consistently demonstrates that offenders dispose of remains in comfort zones, areas they perceive as familiar, isolated, and highly unforgiving. The image of the bewildered, grieving uncle shatters completely. On Friday, April 29th, at 1:20 p.m., heavily armed strike force detectives breach the Campsie apartment. They arrest Derek Barrett, formally charging him with murder. The investigation now moves from identifying the suspect to uncovering the harrowing reality of what occurred behind the closed doors of the family home. The execution of the arrest warrant allows cybercrime units to seize the perpetrator's personal electronic devices. Upon aggressive forensic examination, the true sequence of events is dragged out of the digital shadows. Utilizing advanced algorithmic data recovery techniques, analysts retrieve 19 distinct photographs from Barrett's primary smartphone. He had actively attempted to sanitize his device, deleting the visual files prior to police intervention. But the recovered exchangeable image file format metadata provides hard, unalterable timestamps. These digital artifacts prove that on April 22nd, Mengmei was alive, bound, exposed, and experiencing paralyzing distress in her own bedroom. This occurs during the exact temporal window in which Barrett claims to have been utterly incapacitated by a severe narcotic fugue. The official motive established by law enforcement is unequivocal. This is a crime driven by severe voyeuristic and predatory tendencies. According to agreed statements of fact entered into the judicial record, these were not spontaneous impulses. Barrett had previously confessed to his wife that he harbored an intense attraction toward Mengmei and desired a physical relationship with her. This profound warning sign was inadequately managed, allowing him to remain in unsupervised proximity to the object of his fixation. The moment the logistical barrier of his wife's presence is removed, the fixation mutates into absolute, fatal control. The high-density apartment block functions as a domestic panopticon. Barrett utilizes his familiar knowledge of the ingress routes and sightlines to ensure there are no viable avenues for escape or signaling for help. While the architectural layout of standard late 20th century Sydney units often insulates sound poorly, the complete absence of emergency noise complaints from adjacent neighbors indicates the use of rapid, overwhelming physical force. The victim is ambushed, violently overpowered, and heavily silenced to prevent her voice from penetrating the shared walls. The prolonged abuse culminates in a frenzied, chaotic termination of life. Pathology and autopsy reports submitted to the court reveal that the victim suffers more than 40 distinct injuries. Crucially, the medical examination also identifies numerous defensive wounds on her hands and forearms. Despite being heavily restricted, Mengmei engages in a desperate, violent, and prolonged struggle for survival against her assailant. Following the fatal act, Derek Barrett faces an acute logistical crisis. For 2 days, he retains the deceased within the confines of the Campsie apartment. The unseasonably warm weather of April 2016, the continuous 25-degree ambient heat, transitions from a passive environmental factor into a severe forensic emergency. The interior of the closed suburban unit retains significant thermal energy, rapidly accelerating post-mortem biological processes. In a densely populated building, the impending risk of olfactory detection by nearby tenants forces his hand. By the early hours of Sunday, April 24th, Barrett initiates his extraction strategy. He meticulously wraps the remains in heavy plastic sheeting, a calculated forensic countermeasure designed to prevent the transfer of physical evidence into the interior cabin or trunk of his vehicle. He drives 100 kilometers north along the Pacific Highway, navigating toward the treacherous topography of the Munmorah State Conservation Area. Hauling the remains to the edge of the jagged cliff face, he drops them over the precipice. He anticipates that the abrasive volcanic rocks and the relentless tidal surge will rapidly destroy the evidence and drag it far out to sea. The survival of the remains in the blowhole's highly aerated surface waters is a devastating blow to his methodology, entirely unraveling his attempt at permanent concealment. Following his apprehension, Barrett's defense counsel attempts to construct a narrative predicated on profound chemical intoxication. They claim he consumed massive quantities of methamphetamine, colloquially known as ice, alongside synthetic marijuana. They argue these narcotics rendered his memory hazy and fragmented, leaving him completely out of control. Forensic psychologists systematically dismantled this defense during the judicial proceedings. Expert testimony from Dr. Richard First establishes that the sheer volume and pharmacological profile of the claimed substances do not induce localized selective amnesia. The evidence points to highly organized cognitive awareness, the methodical acquisition of binding materials, the systematic digital documentation of the assault, the sustained infliction of 40 injuries, and the complex logistical execution of moving a body 100 kilometers demonstrate a high degree of explicit purpose and executive functioning. Derek Barrett is not lost in a chemical haze. He is an organized offender executing a long-harbored, deeply destructive fantasy. The judicial response to this profound breach of trust unfolds across two distinct, historically significant phases. In late 2017, the matter is brought before the New South Wales Supreme Court. Confronted by an insurmountable mountain of spatial forensics and recovered telecommunications data, Derek Barrett formally enters a guilty plea to the ultimate charge, alongside 21 additional indictable offenses. These include 19 distinct counts of filming a person without consent for gratification. During the arduous sentencing, Justice Helen Wilson delivers an assessment that is legally precise and morally scathing. The judge characterizes the act as a crime of extreme brutality and great wickedness, classifying it as a depraved act committed by a man in a position of trust, within a place that should have been one of safety and refuge. Addressing Barrett's tearful displays in the witness box, the court notes, "The behavior appears entirely contrived, carrying the distinct air of someone merely playing a part." On December 15, 2017, Barrett is sentenced to 46 years in a maximum security prison with a non-parole period fixed at 34 years and 6 months. However, the digital epistemology of this investigation holds a terrifying, deferred revelation. The permanence of electronic data ensures that the complete truth cannot remain buried forever. In November 2019, years after the courtroom doors have closed, an elderly woman who suffers from dementia residing in the inner west suburb of Strathfield makes an inexplicable discovery. Strathfield is located approximately 6 kilometers away from the original crime scene in Campsie. She accidentally found herself with a highly durable, waterproof USB thumb drive in her home. She has absolutely no connection to Barrett, the victim, or the investigation, and is entirely unaware of the object's dark origins, or how she picked it up from a nearby street. When her visiting daughter inserts the device into a computer terminal in an attempt to identify its owner, they uncover a horrifying, unredacted cache of media. The drive contains 9 lengthy videos and 13 high-resolution photographs of Mengmei Leng. Forensic cyber analysts quickly examined the hardware, confirming that these specific multimedia files were captured by Barrett on April 22, 2016. The footage documents an escalating, sustained level of extreme cruelty inflicted upon the victim prior to her passing. Recognizing the highly incriminating nature of this visual record, Barrett had transferred the most explicit evidence onto the external drive to conceal it from cloud backups and local storage, subsequently deleting the originals from his phone. Through completely unknown circumstances, he ultimately lost or discarded the drive in Strathfield. This serendipitous recovery provides the Director of Public Prosecutions with unfiltered, unassailable proof of premeditation and prolonged sadism. In 2021, this delayed digital evidence triggers a rare and legally complex resumption of penal proceedings. During the unprecedented resentencing hearing, presiding judicial officers note that had this graphic, high-resolution evidence been available during the initial trial, the perpetrator would have faced an overwhelmingly high probability of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Acknowledging the heightened severity depicted in the newly recovered videos, the Supreme Court appends additional time to the existing minimum non-parole period. Consequently, Derek Barrett is not expected to be eligible to apply for release until the year 2052, a penal outcome effectively guaranteeing he will spend the vast majority of his natural lifespan incarcerated. The loss of Mengmei Leng inflicts an enduring transgenerational psychological scar upon an entire demographic. It violently fractures the fundamental diasporic assumption that physical proximity to family guarantees protection in an unfamiliar world. The visible agony of a mother who crossed an ocean to face her daughter's killer illustrates the profound, unspoken human cost borne by those seeking academic advancement abroad. The architecture of this crime relied on domestic isolation and the unforgiving depths of the sea, a calculated attempt to obliterate both a life and the memory of what happened to it. Yet the final, definitive narrative was written not by the perpetrator, but by the immutable, objective data left behind. It is a stark testament to a modern reality, that the deepest shadows are no longer found in physical spaces, but in the digital fragments that refuse to remain silent.